Hello and welcome. There has been a strike on an Iranian military facility that is likely connected to the war in Ukraine. And we have more information from the war in Ukraine about talks about delivery of new weapon systems towards Ukraine, as well as about the indications of a coming second wave of mobilization and the developments on the front line. This and more in this situation report. What we see here is a video on social media showing the strike. Supposedly the viewers, the people recording are talking, is this a drone? Yes, it is a drone. I ran it through a translation program and it said something like gunshots and shot to the head. So it must either be some slang or some mistake by the translation program. The situation is still kind of unclear, even though it's 2 days ago. It was likely an ammunition factory. That was at least what was initially reported. Iran's foreign minister said, though, that strikes like this will not impede Iran's peaceful nuclear program. That would implicate, that would suggest that this is kind of an installation for the nuclear program, though. Different sources then are talking that it's the Material and Energy Laboratory of Esfahan. Generally, it is indicated that this installation both does research as well as production, research in the areas of rocket developments, and supposedly either producing the warheads for Shahed drones or producing the full Shahed drones. It's still completely unclear. The Iranians said it was 3 drones. Their air defense has managed to shoot down 2 of them. One hit the roof though and started a fire. They say it was no serious damage that was involved, like 1 person wounded, but the rest of it was irrelevant. Local media was saying it was 3 quadcopter drones. So small drones with 4 propellers, that's a quadcopter. Quadcopters have a limited range though. That would implicate that the drones were actually started from within Iran and didn't come from a foreign country. So it has to be local agents that were, or terrorists or resistance fighter, or however you want to identify them, that have done this attack. For instance, one example is that in last July, a group of Kurdish Iranians had been arrested by the Iranian government, and the government accused them of working together with Israel, so basically working for the Mossad. Totally, it's unclear now who was the perpetrator. Even the Iranians, at least to the point where I found it, did not officially accuse Israel yet, even though some Telegram sources affiliated to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps are more or less pointing the finger at Israel already. The Ukrainian representative in Iran has been called to the foreign ministry because Ukrainian government person said that basically this comes this happens when you get involved in the war in Ukraine, indicating that somehow Ukraine should be involved in this, which seems kind of unlikely though, but as said, we cannot really say much yet. The Jerusalem Post, which is usually well informed when it comes to security and intel matters in connection with Israel, said it was a phenomenal success according to its sources. They say that it was far more than just some damage to the roof, while Iran has a tradition of downplaying attacks against its infrastructure. And we know a couple of examples in the past, for instance, the attacks on the nuclear infrastructure, where they usually just said that it wasn't that bad until satellite pictures were appearing, showing that the damage was actually substantial. Also, there were reports about an oil refinery on fire in Tabriz, and in Iranian social media sources, there were talks about other attacks in Karach, in Al-Bors, in Desful, in Khuzestan, and in Hamedan. All of those, though, are without any proof. We don't have any images, any pictures, any videos of those attacks or of damage. So it might be that local people that were on social media were misidentifying, for instance, supersonic booms from fighter jets, as there are pictures from Isfahan that supposedly show fighter jets in the air. Isfahan is also one of the has a big air base of the Iranian Air Force there, where among others the F-14 of the Iranian Air Force are stationed. So the theoretical possibility is that those supposedly detonations were happening because Iran was scrambling fighters and they were going supersonic, and that was making the noise. Still, last night, so one day later, there were another round of reports on social media that another explosion happened, this time in Mahabad. This seems to be not true, though. You might have seen it already. There are claims that the images from that explosion are actually from Syria. So as of this point, I cannot find any confirmation, neither from damage nor that the video is actually from Mahabad. It might just be some usual social media rumors that are popping up. Generally, though, it seems likely that it was a military installation, at least according to the Israelis. The Jerusalem Post. The attack was very successful, did damage, and might even slow down the production rate for the Shahed drones, which would obviously benefit Ukraine, which makes it turns this basically gives a direct connection to the war in Ukraine. So far, we don't really know more. Right before I was recording the video, I was doing another search if there are new informations popping up. So far, it doesn't seem to be that there are publicly available satellite pictures yet that have been analyzed or anything like this to either judge the damage or to judge if there have actually been strikes on other installations as well. But that's it from Iran. Let's go to Ukraine. We have news that on the eastern front that the Russians might have had minor successes in Ryanikivka here. So right at Dvorichna, which is here in the north. Those successes should be fairly small, like we are talking about dozens of meters that were gained or something. There are some indications about that. And that's more or less it from the whole front line. Now, obviously, we have reports about massive fighting. In Crimea, there are reports that the Russians are currently doing a counteroffensive in the Ukrainian lines. We have fighting from Chervonopopivka is reported, north Novovodiyane, and of course, Kuzemivka is still there's still battles going on more or less along the whole front line, but there doesn't seem to be any significant change of the control of territory north of the Siversky Donetsk. South of it, though, we have reports about continuous fighting, and I see that I actually missed to put up the video. This here is it. We have Wagner forces that are in Blahodatne. Blahodatne here is right next to Soledar. Blahodatne on this side, on the other side of the river here. Wagner apparently, as we can see, this is the sign for the town. So Wagner has reached it and must, at least on the border of Blahodatne, be secure enough to allow for this photo op without being under fire. So Blahodatne is likely under control of Wagner, which is another small success. The Russians are also saying that their advances in the direction of Paraskovivka have begun, which is here. So Krasna Hora and this area is also under attack right now. We don't have any confirmation about the control of the area. I have not found anything that Krasna Hora is actually already under Russian control, even though the news lately implicate that there is no more Ukrainian presence in Krasna Hora. At least I cannot confirm it. Further south, they have been fighting around Bakhmut. Nothing has changed there. Mostly Wagner forces are attacking the city itself, but there is no proof of any advances in territory as of now. Fighting is also continuing in the direction from Klishchivka in the direction of Ivanivske. Also here, no proof of any success as of now. Fighting is also continuing around Avdiivka. The Russians are claiming some success in the direction of Siverne. No proof of that whatsoever. The Ukrainians claim that they defeated Russian attacks from Vodiane northwards. Further south, we have attacks reported in Marinka. Again, no proof of any change of territory, and the Ukrainians reporting an attack in the direction of Pobieda. Also, again, no confirmation of change of control. Further south, we have reports about attacks from the Russians in the direction of Vuhledar and of Prechistivka. Prechistivka here. Also, no proof of success whatsoever. We know that the Russians advanced somewhat in the direction of Vuhledar in the past few days, and there are Russian claims that they are in the outskirts of Vuhledar, that they've basically reached the settlements. There's no image proof whatsoever, though, to confirm that claim, and we don't see Ukrainian admissions of that success either. So as of now, it seems that the Russians are more or less halfway the direction between Vuhledar and Mykliske in their advances so far. On the southern front has been fairly quiet now. The Russian attacks seem to have stopped along the Zaporizhzhia frontier, which would be the indication that this wasn't actually an offensive, but more or less the exploitation of weak Ukrainian lines in this direction. Along the whole front line, both Zaporizhzhia as well as Kherson, are reports of artillery fire. The Russians are still shelling Kherson. There have been reports that a hospital has been hit. In social media were some pretty unpleasant pictures that were spread around of hospital beds with blood in a destroyed room. So supposedly some people in their hospital beds have either been wounded or been killed by that attack. This is what we hear now. Obviously, both sides strike deep into the other territory as well as soon as they can. From the Russian side, we have a Russian claim that an Iskander missile has hit a steelwork in Zaporizhzhia, has hit it, while the Ukrainians have hit the railway bridge in Svitlodolynske. Here. And we can see here, that's the railway line going over that Molochra river. We have some images here. Or is it? Yes, here it is. We can see here the bridge in the background that has been hit. And Russian sources claim that there were locals for repair work there, and 2 civilians have been killed that were working on repairing that bridge at the same time. That's it already from the front line, so fairly little is happening when it comes to territorial control, but the fighting is going on intensively. Especially the focus point is still around Bakhmut, but also around Avdiivka and Marinka. Not much has changed there. There's more Russian activity in the south to push in the direction basically away from the railway line that's going here to push the Ukrainians away. The successes have been really limited in the last few days, even though there have been successes that we can report. North of the Siversky Donetsk, no real change in control. As said, some indication that the Russians might have had some success in this area here, but again, not fully. I can't confirm that they haven't had the control before that, but there might have been some minor successes in this regard by the Russians themselves. This was it already from the whole front line. As said, while there's not that much happening in territorial control, we should not misinterpret this, that there's no fighting going on and that there are no casualties. Obviously, the casualty rates among both sides are still really high. When it comes to the mobilization, we have Russian opposition media talking about, you can see it here, I'll scroll through it so you can pause and read it yourself if you want to. Claims that that mobilized persons were put under pressure to sign up as volunteers. Supposedly they were put out in the cold weather without any tents, without any provisions. They were basically put in horrible conditions, and among that they were threatened with violence, and there has even been shooting in front of their feet to force them to sign contracts. This is the opposition media telling us. At the same time, I am wondering why this should be true, because if mobilized personnel is already mobilized, and we are not supposedly not talking about conscripts, unless there is some translation error. I translated it with Google, which should more or less be truthful. Mobilized personnel can already be used on the front line, and they will be used until the mobilization is ended. So there is no time frame for it. I don't see much of a point why mobilized personnel should be forced to sign volunteer contracts, which would not change much in the overall situation, except that those personnel would have far lower morale, would be far easier, far more likely to raise their hands and try to capitulate to get out of the situation they are forced in with means as were just reported. So I cannot, to be perfectly honest, I don't fully understand what is supposedly the point in this. If this is not a mistranslation, let me know in the comments if you think you can decipher that situation better than I can do. Also, we have reports from the Duma that the Duma is currently working on 20 bills for the mobilization when it comes to who is exempt from it. And here we see the obvious conclusion: you don't work on 20 bills on a mobilization if you don't intend to continue mobilizing. So supposedly this should codify who is excluded from a mobilization. That's at least how I understand it. We see here families with disabled children, families with 3 children and more, and so on and so forth. This makes sense in an environment where you want to call up additional reserves, either by announcing a second wave of mobilization or by just continuing calling up persons as you see fit. Nevertheless, it shows us that the mobilization in Russia continues and that Russia will continue to call up persons whether they announce it publicly or not. In the political sphere, we have from the British Ministry of Defence a report that from now on, school children will have to learn the basics of life safety courses at school. They will include drills with AK rifles, so Kalashnikovs, and hand grenades. They will include military drill, and they will learn to salute, as well as get to know personal protection gear. Those courses will be mandatory from the 1st of September this year for all school children in Russia over a certain age. Obviously, that shows us Russia is militarizing further and is more or less already indoctrinating and preparing its children for their role as future soldiers, which shows us that this war is either expected to last for very long within Russia, or that Russia doesn't expect to be done with what they're planning to do militarily in regards to military when measures like this are taken. The last option to interpret it would obviously be that they are so unsatisfied with their current fighting age males that they think they need to reintroduce something like this, which is dating back, which was common in Soviet times, that they need to reintroduce it to raise the quality of future soldiers. Also, in addition to that, there will be military training basic classes for university students, so they will also be trained for potential usage in military. Right now, university students are deferred from conscription, which shows us that this is at least as soon as they finish their university, they can be expected to be called up as well. Prigozhin. There's some more talk about Prigozhin here, and one is really spicy, but would fit in the overall picture. Prigozhin is getting confronted right now that he took bribery money from convicted prisoners that he then recruited into Wagner, but kept away from the front lines so they would get their pardon, which there is now confirmation that Putin is pre-signing pardons when the persons are being called up. So they already know they will get pardoned at the end of the time, and obviously somebody who has money might then bribe his way into Wagner, but make sure he's not going to have to fight, he's not going to have to run into the Ukrainian machine gun fire, and just getting his pardon for some money. Prigozhin is going to be confronted with this, and while there is no proof yet, while there's some Prigozhin then mentioned that the person was a former deputy in parliament who was sentenced to prison, and he said no, he was released after having been seriously wounded. Why we don't see any proof of this yet? It seems to fit in the context of Russia and of Russian corruption that something like this should be common practice for prisoners that can actually afford bribery. When it comes to the international support, we have reports from Rheinmetall, the German defense company. They said in Germany alone there is a capacity for 240,000 rounds of 120mm tank rounds per year. And Rheinmetall's CEO said our capacity is bigger than the world's demand. So Germany will be able to supply 120mm rounds for the smoothbore cannons that in the tanks that Ukraine is going to get without any problems. He mentioned this in context that he wants to open a powder factory, so for gunpowder. To propel those charges, because there the capacities for Rheinmetall are still lacking, and he was asking for government support, basically subsidies, because the investment is supposedly too big for Rheinmetall to shoulder it themselves. But still the general capacity supposedly is there, that at least when it comes to 120mm smoothbore rounds, there will not be a shortage in the duration of this war. We have a message here from the NATO, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was in South Korea and was talking to the foreign minister there, and he mentioned something really interesting, because he said we also know that North Korea is providing military support to the Russian war efforts with rockets and missiles. So at least, unless he misspoke, he basically confirmed that North Korea is providing rockets and missiles to the Russian armed forces and thus helping arm the Russian Federation in its war of aggression against Ukraine. And we have one more news here that is from the war zone, that France is considering to transfer fighter aircraft to Ukraine. The planes in considerations would likely be the Mirage 2000-5. Which are scheduled to be decommissioned. They are still fairly powerful fighter planes and probably better than the F-16s, than the F-16 versions that are currently up for discussion. But how much of an effect those fighter aircrafts will actually have and how much potential for having an effect in this war those fighter aircrafts will have are topic of a different video that I plan to make during this week or maybe next week, so stay tuned. And this is a good point to say, if you want to make sure you don't miss videos like this, then subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and if you liked it so far, hit the thumbs up and leave comments for the algorithm, because while we are about to end, I want to show you one more thing here. This is, by the way, how a blow-up panel works in a tank that in this case is an Abrams, but the Leopard 2 also has 15 rounds in a blow-up panel. We could see the anti-tank missile hit here. I'm not completely sure which type it is because of the way it's tumbling. I'm not completely sure. I know that I think that Malyuka of the Russians, for instance, fly like this, but I'm not completely sure. So the hit is here, and you could see one of the crew getting out of it, and here it even seems that the tank is starting to drive, which would indicate that the driver is still fully able to operate his vehicle, while more or less the ammunition is exploding in the tank, which is obviously not killing the crew in this regard. Now, it's up to you. What do you think? When will the first Western fighter jets arrive in Ukraine? And what do you think how effective it will be when they are being sent? I'm curious for your opinions, and obviously that can be the ground for heated debates. So right away in the comments, that is also helping with the algorithm. This channel is only possible because of viewers like you. So if you liked what you saw and want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. Your help is really appreciated. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.